From the disturbing murder of a university student from Poland who was discovered on a ship propeller, the enigmatic UFO sightings of Wytheville, to the graphic discovery of a child in River Thames. Welcome to part 2 of the community-made Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg, where we dive into true stories that seem to have no concise conclusion. Make sure to check out part 1 in the description, and if you have a mystery you want to submit, visit the Google Forms link also located below. And if you'd like to support the channel and get early access to all of the ad-free versions of these videos, check out the Patreon. Enjoy the video. In the world of true crime, there is one outcome that is arguably much worse than never finding the culprit, that being finding and charging an innocent person. In the case of Latricia White, Lee Wackerhagen, and his son Chance, Lee was deemed a murderer for over 2 decades. Latricia was known to be a dedicated mother and diligent employee, having 2 kids and being a nurse. For all intents and purposes, she seemed like a person that nobody would dislike. She was well known through her community as being a kind and warm-hearted woman. In 1993, 38-year-old Latricia was dating a man named Lee Wackerhagen, who was 40 years old. Lee and Latricia had known each other for quite a while, and they even went to the same school. One commonality the two shared was that they were both going through or had already gone through a divorce, with Lee's prior relationship lasting almost a decade. Lee's ex-wife, Gay Walshak, shared that while Lee never physically attacked her or Chance, he was frequently lashing out verbally and mentally abusing her. In court, Gay was given custody of Chance and Lee was given permission to watch over him on the weekends. On December 27, 1993, Latricia's father, Jack, decided to visit her home after she failed to answer or return his phone calls. Jack said everyone was concerned about Latricia because she just hadn't gone to work Monday, and she never fails to go to work or at least call. When Jack arrived at the house and entered it, he called out to Latricia but got no response. He looked around the first floor before heading upstairs and inside Latricia's bedroom, and inside it was Latricia just lying there lifeless. Jack told authorities, "I just called her name and then I went over and felt her and I knew she was dead." Investigators determined that Latricia had been shot 6 times in the head with a .22 caliber firearm. Nothing in her house was touched and there didn't seem to be any signs of a struggle. And at this time, Latricia was allowing Lee to live with her, but he was nowhere to be found. This raised immediate suspicion within the police force. Furthermore, Chance was handed over to Lee during this time so that he could celebrate the holidays with his father. Sheriff Mike Bading stated that there were only 2 scenarios that could have played out. The fact that her boyfriend could not be found led us to several different areas to investigate. Number 1, is he a suspect? Could he have committed this crime? The other one, is he a victim? Has he also been injured? Lee's pickup truck was discovered abandoned in Austin, Texas 3 days after Latricia's body was discovered. This was about 30 miles from the crime scene. It didn't take long for authorities to realize that something terrible had also happened involving Lee. Inside the vehicle was Lee's hunting rifle, checkbook, wallet, toolbox, and Christmas presents. All of the presents had blood smeared across them. It was initially believed that the blood was Latricia's, but this was soon ruled out. The following blood test yielded inconclusive results and authorities could not determine whether it belonged to Lee, Chance, or someone else entirely. The initial hypothesis was that Lee became irritated for whatever reason and snapped. He then went on a murderous rampage that resulted in Latricia's death. Police later believed that jealousy may have been the driving factor, but Lee's family and friends did not believe that he was capable of such violence. Instead, they thought that it was much more likely that he was also a victim. Barbara, Lee's sister, said, "We haven't heard anything from him at all, and that tells me he's got to be dead." One of his friends said, "I don't know who did it, I just know that he couldn't have done it and then just disappear off the face of the earth." Contrary to Lee's family and friends' belief, police thought that the most obvious suspect was still him. According to Latricia's family, Lee was an extremely jealous and cautious man. Chance's mother said that at first, Lee may seem like a good person, but he had a bad temper and he will just as quickly treat anyone terribly. Family members informed investigators that most of the arguments revolved around Chance. Just days before Christmas, Lee packed his bags and threatened Latricia that he was going to leave. Eventually, the three were able to reconcile and go out for a dinner at a local restaurant. However, the next day was when Latricia was found dead. But as the months went by, he was still nowhere to be found. After about 6 months of no updates, Chance's grandfather claimed that he received an anonymous phone call. All he said was "help me," and then the phone was jerked out of his hand and slammed down. I look over at my wife and I said, "That was Chance." This call may have been a cry for help from the boy, but it seems that Lee's family believes that it's much more likely that this was a prank/hoax. They were adamant that the most likely outcome is that Lee and Chance were murdered. During this time, Latricia's family still argued that Lee was the culprit. As the years passed, authorities did gather new evidence that supports the idea that both Lee and Chance were indeed victims. Lee was not the culprit by any means. Police now believe that the true culprit was someone else that had close ties to both families. And very quickly, I want to introduce today's sponsor, who I'm very happy to be partnering with, AG1. I have been a long-time subscriber to AG1 and I absolutely love them. AG1 is a foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health that I use essentially every day. They have me covered with vitamins, minerals, and whole food ingredients to aid in my overall health. I'm a bit of a child when it comes to eating, so having my daily AG1 helps round out my nutritional requirements for the day. One of the first things I do in the morning is grab myself a scoop of AG1, mix it with water, and pop a lemon inside, then just get straight to work. And one of the main reasons I've stuck with AG1 for so long is the taste. I've tried several other nutritional supplements, but they always have an odd taste to them, so I always try to down it as quickly as I can. But AG1 doesn't have that, and I enjoy sipping on it throughout the morning. And stick around to learn how you can get yourself some free AG1. AG1 promotes health in your gut and your immune system, not to mention the 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food ingredients help your mental clarity and promote better focus. I've definitely noticed a change in my alertness and energy levels since introducing AG1 to my lifestyle. I've shared it with many friends and family, and they all have nothing but good things to say about it. AG1 sent over a 30-day supply, a bottle, canister, scoop, and some travel packs, which makes getting in your nutrients a breeze if you're on the go. I encourage you guys to give them a shot, and for a limited time, AG1 is providing me with a link that gives you all a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 travel packs of AG1. Thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring today's video. So this case is a hotly debated one, and there is a decent split of people believing that this case is actually solved. Kendrick Johnson was a 17-year-old boy who was found dead inside a rolled-up wrestling match in the gym of Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. It was January 11th, 2013 when the young Kendrick was found in the vertically set mat. Initially, his death was deemed accidental, but his parents hired a private pathologist to do an additional autopsy. Contrary to the initial investigation, this new autopsy stated that Kendrick died as a result of blunt force trauma. In 2016, the Department of Justice said that they were not going to be filing any criminal charges in relation to Kendrick's death. In response, Kendrick's family filed a $100 million lawsuit stating that his death was a murder and those that were involved in the investigation were part of a cover-up. They continued and claimed that the two responsible were the sons of FBI agents. However, this lawsuit was withdrawn and the family had to pay nearly $300,000 in legal fees after being accused of fabricating evidence in order to support their claims. After the initial investigation, authorities suggested that Kendrick may have fallen headfirst into the mat looking for something and ultimately died when he couldn't get out. Several students from LHS shared that the students commonly stored their shoes and personal items under or near the mat, and Kendrick was actually found not wearing any shoes. Then another student said that Kendrick often tossed his Adidas gym shoes in the hole of the mats after gym. He'd go to the mats, jump up, and toss the shoes inside the middle of the hole. Lieutenant Stride Jones said, "We never had credible information that indicated this was anything other than an accident." Following the investigation, there was more drama, this time within the funeral home. The funeral home that was in charge of Kendrick's body stated that those in charge during the autopsy removed his organs, and so they stuffed the body with newspapers to fill the void. Despite a subsequent investigation saying that the funeral home did not follow best practice and could have used a more appropriate material other than newspaper, they were cleared of any wrongdoing. There was also camera footage of Kendrick shortly before his death that had some people scratching their heads. An analyst noticed that the tapes from different cameras were missing over an hour of footage. Then another pair was missing over 2 hours of footage. The absence of the videos were said to be a result of improper synchronization of cameras. The attorneys that Kendrick's family hired feared that the camera footage may have been tampered with as a part of the cover-up, but after inspections from additional analysts, these strange technical issues in the cameras were essentially explained. At this point, the Johnson family attorneys were being accused of not being entirely truthful with their statements. The case was reopened in March of 2021. The sheriff is adamant that the conclusion of an accidental death was correct and that he does not consider the case to be a homicide. Then in January of 2022, a second investigation was closed with no charges filed. Some of the public side with police and say that this was just an accident, while others believe that there was foul play involved. The Milwaukee PD bombing resulted in the deaths of 2 officers and 2 civilians. A 20-pound explosive was hidden in a passageway between a house and the Italian Evangelical Church. A 10-year-old girl was roaming around when she discovered the suspicious device and told her mom about it. The same evening, a member of the church named Sam Bazzone and another man brought the item to the police station. Authorities took it and several experts began examining it when suddenly it burst into a hellfire of fury. There were 10 officers in the assembly room when the bomb went off and 8 of them lost their lives that day, while 2 others were seriously injured. But there were several more fatalities above the assembly room and near the entrance. In the operating room above the assembly room, operator Edward Spindler was killed by shrapnel that ripped through the floor. Then at the entrance of the facility was an unidentified man and a woman named Catherine Walker. Both of them also lost their lives. It's generally believed that the bomb was not intended to go to the police station at first, as it was hand-delivered by unsuspecting individuals that were part of the church. Instead, it's thought that the bomb may have been placed by people who wanted to assist with anarchists who were rioting in the area. There was an Italian gang that was trying to stop a patriotic rally that the church was leading. One member of the group pulled out a gun and shot a detective, which then resulted in the death of the shooter by the hands of other nearby officers. This was subsequently followed with more gunfire from other gang members, but to this day, there's no confirmation that this gang was responsible for the creation of the explosive. On April 25, 1987, in California, 16-year-old Jenny Pratt went out with her boyfriend Curtis. Jenny's parents didn't particularly like Curtis and just had a bad feeling about the guy. These instincts would turn out to be correct. Diane, Jenny's mother, later came out and said Curtis looked 17. Further on down the road, I found out he had been in jail for substances and that he was 24 years old. Just bad news for a 16-year-old kid. But on the night of April 15th, Curtis took Jenny for a ride on a motorcycle that he borrowed from a friend. Curtis promised Jenny's parents that they'd be back no later than midnight, but Jenny didn't make it home that night. It was later revealed that Jenny had been smacked in the back of her head with a dense wooden board by someone in a passing vehicle. Jenny's parents received a phone call from the police that Jenny had been airlifted to a hospital and was in critical condition. Diane recounted, "They said our daughter had been in an accident. I said, is she okay? They wouldn't tell me anything, only that we'd have to come down." When Jenny's parents arrived at Scripps Medical Center in La Jolla, they were greeted by a doctor who had terrible news. He said the blow from the board that struck her was great enough to actually crush the skull, and that caused immediate shutdown of her brain. Jenny was brain dead, and medical officials believed that she had at most a few hours left to live. Diane said that when she saw Jenny, Jenny's hair was completely red and she had blood streaming out of her nose, ears, and mouth. But somehow, against all odds, Jenny survived. However, she did slip into a coma later on. Sergeant Jim Byler said the following during an interview. "Our first involvement in the case was to examine the evidence that was found at the crime scene, which consisted of the 2x4 that was used to hit Jenny and Curtis. So we examined that for physical evidence and didn't find any fingerprints. There were some bloodstains on it which were determined to be Jenny's." Curtis was interviewed that same day. His account of what happened basically was that he was giving Jennifer a ride home and they were driving down Rancho Santa Fe Road, getting ready to make a left turn. Curtis said, "We were just approaching the intersection going pretty slowly and all of a sudden something struck me and I just went, ow, what was that?" It hurt really bad, and then the car zoomed by. I turned around to tell Jenny that someone threw something at me or something. I didn't know what happened. She was out of it, and so I just thought, oh my god, what's happening? Jim Byler believed that the culprits were no older than Jenny and Curtis, and they may have even been classmates of Jenny. Curtis shared that the vehicle the people were in was a white pickup truck and there was a large group of males in the back. Jenny's family commissioned a private investigator who interviewed several students at Jenny's high school. This investigator, named Louis Kersafi, stated that he believed Curtis was the primary target and not Jenny. Why? Well, Louis found out that several years before this incident, Curtis was caught selling illegal substances, including cocaine, and after being caught by police, he snitched to get a lighter sentence. Police interviewed people that they believed may have harbored ill will against Curtis, and it turned out that Curtis had actually confronted an enemy of his the day before Jenny was struck. This may have been the person responsible. Curtis kept insisting that he did not get a good look at the people in the back of the truck, since it was traveling at over 55 miles per hour. Investigators had their doubts though. They reconstructed the events as described by Curtis and reenacted it at both 55 miles per hour and 10 miles per hour. They concluded that the results of the 10-mile reenactment were much closer, if not identical, to what happened in reality. The 55-mile reenactment had dramatically different results. Private investigator Kersafi believed that Curtis did see the people in the truck, and after consistent pressure, Curtis caved. He provided several names, one of which was the guy that Curtis had confronted the day before. Now, as far as I know, nobody was arrested or charged for this assault. 3 more months after the event, Jenny woke from her coma. She couldn't move at all at first, but after the 7-month mark, she was able to speak. After an additional year, she was able to walk again. To this day, a name still hasn't been tied to the attack. In the waters of Lake Michigan is a tiny mass of land known as Poverty Island. Due to the terrible weather that is often associated with the area, numerous ships are rumored to have sunk near the island. Over the decades, enigmatic tales were spread about possible lost treasure. For example, one tale claims that there are 5 chests stuffed with gold worth more than $400 million today. One professional diver named Richard Bennett spent over 2 decades and 6 figures searching the area for the treasure. When asked why he keeps going after years of failure, Richard said, "Any story that survives 100 years has to have some validity to it. If they survive 100 years, they probably have an 80 to 85% chance of being true." The story of lost treasure dates back to the 1860s. French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte III secretly issued a shipment of gold to Canada that had to travel across the Atlantic. The gold never reached its destination. Different versions of the story suggest that the ship was lost/attacked near Lake Michigan. A historian named Chuck Feltner thinks that the tales are nothing but mere fiction. Records of shipwrecks on the Great Lakes in the year 1863 are extremely good. We've not been able to find any evidence that any of these vessels that were recorded to have been lost were sunk in the vicinity of Poverty Island, or that they were French vessels, as the legend would have it be. Another rumor made its routes in 1929 when a group of sailors allegedly uncovered the chests after their anchor snagged onto them. The crew retrieved the anchor, and right as their eyes could catch a glimpse of the treasure, the chain snapped and all of the chests plummeted back to the bottom of the waters. At one point, a group of investors from Chicago put together over $50,000 in an attempt to search Poverty Island. A local lighthouse keeper in the area said that one day he saw the crewman in charge of the search rejoicing and celebrating, almost as if he found the treasure. But on that same night, a massive storm hit which sank the ship with all of the men on board. Will anyone ever find this lost treasure, or is this all a false tale? It was Saturday, March 2nd, 1996 when Alicia Showalter left her husband and home to begin a 150-mile trip to visit her mother in Charlottesville, Virginia. Alicia was coming out of Baltimore, Maryland and planned to spend the entire day shopping with her mom. Alicia departed at 7:30 a.m. and planned to be at the mall by 10:30. Alicia's mother, Sadie, arrived at the location first and sat at a table expecting her daughter to appear at any minute. But as an hour slowly crept by, she began to worry. It wasn't like Alicia to be late, so Sadie called Alicia's husband, Mark. Mark was also a bit confused, but said that the weather may have been what's delaying her. Mark said that if Alicia still hasn't shown up in the next half an hour, to give him a call back. Alicia never showed up. At 6 p.m. that same day, a Virginia state trooper was patrolling a highway when he noticed a vehicle parked on the side of the road. He pulled over to see that no one was inside. This car was Alicia's, parked about 50 miles away from the mall. The trooper took note of a small white napkin placed underneath the windshield wiper, a signal often used to signal car issues. But after further inspection, the car was in perfect working order. Investigators were able to get in touch with Alicia's family and notify her that she was nowhere to be found. The local news spread the word the following morning, and police shut down several highways and blocked the roads, believing that Alicia may have been abducted. Several people came forward reporting that they saw Alicia conversing with a Caucasian male driving what appeared to be a black pickup truck. Additionally, almost 24 women informed police that they had been approached by a man in the area that fit the description. Special Agent Thomas Carter said most of the witnesses talked about a man who would come up behind them or beside them in a dark small pickup truck, flashing his headlights, honking his horn, doing everything he could to attract their attention. Most of the women that did have some concern for their vehicle did manage to pull off to the side of the road. He immediately jumps underneath the vehicle, conducts an examination, comes out, and then engages them in a very polite conversation about the mechanical difficulties that he allegedly uncovered. The guy would then offer to drive the woman to a phone. Some of the women didn't pull over for the man, and they stated that he angrily bashed his steering wheel or yelled profanities at them. A woman who chose to remain anonymous said that she came into contact with the same man about a week before Alicia disappeared. The man also approached her in the same manner and offered to drive her to a phone after telling her that her car needed repairs. The woman accepted the offer. She claimed that the man would slow down and pull off to some off-road areas and say that he couldn't see. Eventually, the woman became extremely uncomfortable and asked to leave the vehicle. The man did not allow this, so she had to fight her way out. At first, he did put up a bit of a struggle, but he ultimately just shoved her out, thinking that this was no longer worth the hassle. Unlike the previous woman, Alicia was not as fortunate. About 2 months after her disappearance, her body was discovered in the woods 15 miles from Culpeper. It was clear that she had been murdered, and medical officials estimated that it was around the same day, if not the exact same day, when she went missing. Several officers believe the culprit is now in some other state doing the exact same thing. The investigation is ongoing with no new suspects to date. In June of 1990, an armored car was transporting $11 million in cash. The driver was named Albert Ranieri, and he decided to make a stop at a convenience store around 7 a.m. on the 26th. A guard known as Mary, who accompanied Albert that day, stepped out of the truck for a routine stop at a convenience store. In the brief moment where Mary was buying some donuts and coffee, Albert's truck was raided. An unidentified man in a Halloween mask pointed a firearm at Albert, while someone else stole a key from him and got into the back of the truck. Albert opened the door and stepped out before having his hands and feet tied together with plastic cuffs. After the gunmen were situated, they ordered Albert back into the vehicle and tied up Mary as well when she came out of the store. The two were held at gunpoint and threatened into driving to an isolated area that was about 1.5 miles from the convenience store. Meanwhile, there was a gray van tailing the truck. Captain Neil Flood of Monroe County said one couldn't have picked a better location. It was about 75 to 100 yards off the road, and it completely disappeared from sight behind a small hill. And we know that the site had been prepared prior to the robbery. There were several tree branches that had been freshly cut to make sure that this large vehicle would fit. Investigators speculated that the two gunmen were met by several other accomplices at the location. Mary said that the culprits didn't speak much to each other. I sat there quietly, making sure I didn't hear any more voices. I was scared for my life. I kept thinking about my son, and I just thought I was going to die. After arriving at the location, Mary and Albert were just tossed out there, left alone. It took Mary a grueling 15 minutes to break open the cuffs. She was unable to free Albert, so she drove the armored truck, which was now completely empty, back to the company's facility and reported the crime. The entire heist went down in under an hour. The very next day, police found the gray van that was said to be tailing the truck, but it had been abandoned. The back of the van had nearly $15,000 in cash strewn about. By all accounts, the heist appeared to be an inside job. Both gunmen were even said to have worn clothing that resembled the employees of the company. The route and amount of cash being transported that day was also only known by a handful of people. Down the line, it was confirmed that the heist was an inside job. Albert Ranieri was tried and convicted of racketeering. While the racketeering charges were unrelated to the heist, he did also plead guilty to being involved with that robbery. However, he would not name any of the others that were part of the heist. This was the largest on-road armored car robbery in the history of the US, and none of the $11 million besides the $15,000 was ever recovered. Oregon has many strange and disturbing tales, and at the center of the story we're going to be talking about today are the infamous hanging trees of Lafayette, Salem, and Dallas. These trees have a somber history of justice, grief, and vengeance. Lafayette's tree was commonly used for executions from 1863 to 1887, with its final one involving a convicted murderer named Richard Marple. Salem's tree was also the focal point of many executions that have been obscured with time. But the intriguing part of Dallas's tree is that it comes with a twisted mystery. There was a man named Oscar Kelty who, consumed with rage, killed his wife. Oscar married Clara Glandon in 1884, and almost immediately the couple had marital problems. In 1887, Clara left Oscar and moved back home with her parents, claiming that Oscar was abusing her. In June of the same year, Oscar visited a railroad depot that doubled as a gun storage. Oscar told the station employee Thomas Groves that he wanted to withdraw his firearm so that he could go on a hunting trip. Thomas saw no issue and complied. With the gun, Oscar headed towards Clara's location. When he got there, he knocked on the door, and when Clara came out, he begged her to come back to him and that he was sorry for how he treated her. But Clara had already told herself that she'd never go back to Oscar and turned him down. Oscar was boiling at this point. He grabbed his gun and took Clara's life. Right after Clara hit the ground, Oscar attempted to take his own life but was only able to wound himself. Authorities were contacted and promptly arrested Oscar. County officials delayed Oscar's trial due to his injuries, but there were several members of the public that disagreed with this break and sought to expedite the situation. In the early morning of July 7th, 1887, a group of men drove over to the county jail where Oscar is being held, broke in, and abducted him. The lone guard, Harry Depew, tried to stop the group from entering but was easily overwhelmed. The group of men took Oscar to an oak tree next to the courthouse and hung him. The county sheriff promptly initiated an investigation to identify the men responsible. The sheriff also commissioned an additional detective. Together, they suspected that the mob that was responsible was primarily comprised of friends and neighbors of Clara's family. The investigators were confident that the mob was led by a man named Abraham Blackburn, who was a farmer that lived in the same county as Clara. Blackburn was arrested but was kept at a different jail which was located in Salem to dissuade any attempt at rescuing him. Blackburn's preliminary hearing was held on July 26, 1887, and the detective that claimed he could identify Blackburn as the leader froze up and was now not as confident. Ultimately, Blackburn was acquitted and released. From here, interest in the case quickly faded into obscurity. No one knows who was really responsible for the death of Oscar Kelty. Some people suggest that it was actually the KKK who got involved. Almost every year, Arizona's Tonto National Forest plays host for dozens of families looking for a tranquil getaway during Memorial Day weekend. For the families that return to the park every year, they have a routine procedure for getting ready. So you can imagine the looks on their faces when a 10-ton semi-truck comes out of nowhere and rams through the trees. A group of campers were so close to the truck that if they reached out to it, their arm would have been taken off. One member of this group got a brief look at the driver and said there was no expression on his face at all. He didn't even attempt to slow down or look over to see if we needed help or anything. He just kept going. This driver was a 29-year-old father of 3 named Devin Williams. On Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, Deputy Dean Wells received a report that there was a 48-foot semi-truck randomly parked in the woods. Wells went to the woods to investigate and couldn't locate the driver anywhere. Other than being parked in an odd location, the truck appeared normal. There was no damage to the interior or exterior of the truck. The deputy was able to trace the truck back to Devin and found out that he was on a routine route starting in Kansas. From there, he headed towards California where he dropped off the truck's contents. While there, Devin called his boss, Tom Wilson. Authorities contacted Tom to see if Devin was acting strange, but Tom said that Devin seemed perfectly fine. Furthermore, a woman that picked up the loads in California also said that Devin did not act any different than normal. The day before Devin abandoned his truck in the woods, he contacted his workplace complaining about how he couldn't sleep. But the next morning, on Sunday, he was seen speeding through the Tonto National Forest. Nobody has a reasonable answer as for why Devin did what he did. Most investigators said that it was most likely drugs. Devin's wife grew anxious as she knew something was wrong. The couple had recently purchased a new home, and according to her, they were the happiest that they had ever been. Police utilized canine rescue teams and off-road vehicles to try and track down Devin, but they couldn't find a single trace of him. As the months passed, police were hopeful that hikers would at least find bone fragments or pieces of Devin's clothing. When there was still nothing, people began to suggest that maybe aliens had abducted Devin. Deputy Wells shared that he has never come up empty-handed when it comes to his searches over the years. At the very least, his searches resulted in a confirmation that the person was dead. It would take almost 2 years until hikers finally found a human skull in the woods, and shockingly, the skull was confirmed to belong to Devin. Medical officials were able to use his dental records to confirm this. However, they still have no idea how he died or what even caused his erratic behavior. Harvey McLeod is the name of a 65-year-old cab driver from Modesto, California, and over the decade of driving different people, he has seen quite the array of clients. But the strangest and most dangerous moment was when a man in a turban and a fake beard waved him down for a ride. Harvey greeted the man and the passenger responded with a rugged whisper. The man said he didn't have enough cash on him to cover the entire fare, but his brother could pay the difference once he got to his destination. Harvey said no problem and drove a couple of blocks down the road, but then the passenger told him to stop and got right up into Harvey's face with a gun pointed right at him. At first, he thought it was a robbery, but in reality, Harvey was going to be turned into a live bomb. The passenger strapped a metal box to his waist with a keypad and sealed it shut. The gunman requested that Harvey drive them back to Modesto. During that drive, he kept reminding Harvey that he could set the bomb off at any given moment with just his cell phone. Harvey was ordered to park nearby a bank and go inside. He approached the bank manager and handed her a note. The manager, named Denise, said, "I thought I was dealing with an irate customer because he was agitated. I proceeded to read the letter, and about midway through, it shocked me and it upset me. I looked around the lobby and it was very scary that if I didn't do the right thing, that all of us could be blown up as a result of that." Denise didn't want to take any risk, so she went along with the orders given to her. Denise called an employee over and together they filled up a briefcase with cash. Harvey took it and quickly went back to his vehicle. Inside was a set of instructions from the gunman. At this point, the passenger had fled the scene. Harvey drove to a hardware store that was about 15 minutes from the bank. Afterwards, he left behind the briefcase of cash and his car keys inside the vehicle. The final step instructed Harvey to wait by a payphone that was about a half-mile from the hardware store. The gunman was supposed to call Harvey with instructions on how to dismantle the bomb. Harvey waited 5 minutes with no phone call, then 10 minutes and 20 minutes. Nobody called. That's when Harvey decided to contact the police. In just a few minutes, police sealed off the area and evacuated all the civilians. At this point, Harvey was experiencing a flurry of different emotions and his stomach was rolling. He struggled to stay on his feet. Ultimately, the bomb squad was able to safely remove the device from Harvey's body. This random passenger just got away with a perfect robbery. Or at least he almost did. Unknown to him, some people did spot him outside of the bank. Once the event hit the news, police were contacted by 2 witnesses that reported an oddly dressed man standing outside of the bank Harvey was at during the robbery. The man was about 6 feet tall and 160 pounds with short cropped hair and no facial hair. To this day, nobody knows who he really was. Katherine Hobbs was a girl who seemingly predicted her own death. Katherine had a stressful childhood, with her parents divorcing when she was 8 years old and losing her best friend in 7th grade from a heart condition. At some point in her life, she began to tell her parents and friends that she wouldn't live past 16 years of age. Catherine's mom recounted one night years ago saying, "She got very teary-eyed one night and told me, 'Mom, I don't want to get any older. I want to be a little girl.' Her mom replied, 'Kathy, we all have to grow up. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but we all do it.' To this, Kathy said, 'But I'm not going to.'" Kathy's paranoia drove her to living an isolated lifestyle where she barely ever left the house, fearing that any day she'd meet her end. This mindset would last up until her 16th birthday, when she finally began to feel that maybe she was being fearful for no reason. On the morning of her 16th birthday, Kathy jumped out of bed with joy and ran to her mother saying, "I made it, Mom, I made it. I'm 16, I did it, I'm alive." For a brief stint, Kathy finally lived her life and enrolled as a beauty student. She was filled with nothing but joy. Then on July 23rd, 1987, only months after her 16th birthday, Kathy went on a trip to a convenience store nearby. She purchased a book at 11:17 p.m. and never returned home. Kathy's mother had already checked out for the day and was asleep, so Kathy's absence wasn't reported to the police until the next morning. Kathy's mother informed authorities that Kathy was being oddly stubborn when it came to getting a kiss goodbye before she left. She also informed news reporters that she had a bad feeling. She woke up that same morning at 3 a.m. from a nightmare. She said, "I woke up out of a sound sleep. I felt like I had been hit on the head, and all of a sudden I got a very peaceful feeling and I thought, well, it's over now, and I fell back asleep." 0 witnesses came forward to provide information on Kathy's disappearance. Authorities got their first break in the case about a week later. A geologist studying rock formations discovered the lifeless body of Kathy lying on the ground near 2 large boulders. Stained across them was dried up blood. Medical officials determined that she died from blunt force trauma. This creeped out a lot of people since, if you remember, in Kathy's mother's dream, she said she awoke after being hit or bumped in the head. In that general area where Kathy was found, investigators found tire tracks which could be traced to where the vehicle had pulled in from. Kathy's room was searched and police found letters that she had written about a month before her 16th birthday. The letters spoke about how grateful she was to have a loving family and that when she died, they shouldn't be sad. About another month down the line, authorities received a tip, but this tip included details that no normal witness could have ever known. It included the exact location where Kathy was abducted, every piece of clothing that she was wearing, and the precise location where her body was left. Furthermore, the anonymous individual went on to describe the vehicle that the culprit drove. They even provided a name, Robbie. Police eagerly searched the license plate number given to them and the name, but no results popped up. The car didn't seem to exist. When news of this information came out, the public and the police force were begging the person to come forward and reveal themselves, or at the very least give more information to the authorities, but they never did. Some people think that the person who phoned in was actually the murderer themselves, and that this call was made just to toy with the family and investigators involved. They just wanted to give them a false feeling that they might be close to solving the case when in reality they're exactly where they started. One of the more likely suspects was named Michael Lee Lockhart. At the time, he was in the process of being convicted for 4 other murders. There were reports that Michael had stolen a vehicle that had fibers that matched some material found at the location of Kathy's body. Now, the most damning piece of evidence is probably the receipts found in Michael's possession. They matched up with the time and location of the store that Kathy visited. So to some, perhaps that's enough evidence to convince you that Michael Lockhart was the culprit. However, he never confessed and denied being involved, and since he was being sentenced to death, police decided not to pursue this case. And yes, it's as dumb as it sounds, but it happens more often than you would think. So to this day, there is no official culprit ever identified in Kathy's death. There is an old legend that suggests there is a wealth of gold hidden somewhere in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. These mountains cover over 160,000 acres of dry, rugged terrain, and allegedly, somewhere in there are the largest gold deposits in America. This legend has come to be known as the Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine. In 1876, there were claims that the gold was initially discovered by a German man named Jacob Waltz. When Jacob was 80 years old, he hid his mine to keep others from discovering it. At the entrance, he dug a hole that was nearly 7 feet deep, then placed logs, dirt, and stones on top of it. Jacob claimed that an entire pack train could be sent over the entrance and nobody would ever notice it. Over the course of time, he was given the nickname the Dutchman. Only months after discovering the mine, Jacob got pneumonia and had to leave the area. He would never return to his treasure. A member of the Superstition Mountain Historical Society named Clay Wurst shared that Jacob revealed his gold mine on his deathbed. Jacob said he had been living off of the money that the gold sold for since he found it. According to him, there was enough gold to make millionaires out of 20+ men. Rumors suggest that the gold is now worth well over 200 million USD today. Jacob Waltz left behind several clues to one of his close friends and another miner that led to the gold. He wanted to leave them a detailed map with the precise location of the mine, but he died just before he could complete it. The only clues that they received were verbal. He said, "The setting sun shines into the entrance to my mine and glitters on the gold, so it must have faced to the west." He said, "You take the first gorge on the south side from the west end of the range." He said that you can see Weaver's Needle to the south from above my mine. Jacob's friend and the miner came together and invested every single penny they had in search of the mine, but ultimately they came out empty-handed. Eventually, this friend stepped away and gave up after several years. The miner, on the other hand, just kept going, but even he had a breaking point. After an additional 50+ years of searching for the mine, he committed suicide, realizing that he'd never find it. About 100 years later, a treasure hunter named Walsh Gazier decided to try his hand at finding the gold. He used the clues that had been handed down from Jacob's deathbed, but after falling ill, he had to obtain outside help. He contacted an attorney and a historian and gave them the clues and information he had of the places he had already searched. Then one day, Walsh asked his wife to drop him off at the trailhead. From there, he hiked alone into the mountains. This was the last time Walsh was ever seen alive. His body was discovered about 3 days later by a ranch hand named Don Shade. Medical officials determined that Walsh died of a heart attack. But this story is far from over. That historian that Walsh hired got a surprising visitor 1 month after his death, Walsh's son, Roland. Roland said that his father had found the lost Dutchman mine and pulled out some gold that was supposedly taken from it. Upon further analysis, the gold was determined to be genuine and from the same location as some other gold that Jacob had passed down. Roland wanted to retrace his father's steps and find the mine himself. The historian said that's fine and handed Roland all of the papers and maps that Walsh had left behind. Roland said thanks and set off on his own journey. But something else happens later on. Just a couple months later, a stranger approached that historian, and do you have a guess as to who he introduced himself as? Roland Gazier, Walsh's son. The historian's jaw dropped to the ground. He immediately asked the man for an ID, and when he forked it out to show the historian, it did in fact confirm that this guy was Roland. The historian had just been finessed out of all of the work and research that had been done by Roland's father in finding the lost Dutchman's gold mine. But this begs the question, where did the imposter get that gold? Well, you see, when Walt died, he had on a backpack. The sheriff's office had planned to send the backpack off to Walt's son, but Roland never got such an item. The sheriff's office didn't bother looking inside of the backpack, but they said the weight could have been gold. The sheriff and historian recounted the events, and the sheriff mentioned seeing a man in the area where Walt's body was found. The description of this man matched up with the imposter that the historian met. To this day, no one knows for sure where this mine is or if it's even real. The Superstition Mountains have now been classified as a government-owned area, and any gold found would belong to the government. But nevertheless, there are hikers and modern prospectors that venture into the mountains in search of the lost Dutchman's gold mine. This case is one that has many people scratching their heads, as it seems that an alleged psychic was the main catalyst in solving it. During the winter of 1993 in Brooksville, Florida, there was an investigation on a particularly tough murder case. In February of the same year, a 12-year-old girl by the name of Jennifer Odom went missing after getting off a school bus. After days of searching, her body was found with clear signs that she had been mercilessly murdered. Authorities spent over a year investigating her case, but no matter what leads were provided and what resources were allocated, they just couldn't seem to solve it. That's when psychic Nancy Meyer comes in. Nancy had been working with police for decades and had been consulted on several investigations. 8 times out of 10, she was able to provide critical information that either solved the case or resulted in vital revelations. Nancy was not permitted to view the classified photographs, so instead, authorities placed them upside down, and Nancy was able to visualize several killers. I want to say that one is almost wiry looking in the arms. His arms are not like powerful in the sense of muscle, but powerful in the sense of someone who works and lifts or has lifted heavy things. Nancy requested to be taken to the site of Jennifer's abduction the next day, and she pointed out where the killers were lurking. According to her, they approached Jennifer inquiring about directions. It's like a movie in my head, and I stand beside the victim and I try to describe everything that I'm seeing as it unfolds. And a lot of times that's really helpful to the police officers because sometimes they have odd pieces of evidence at the scene that they don't understand the significance of. And when I describe the sequence of events, it sometimes makes sense out of odd little pieces that they couldn't make any sense out of. Nancy walked around the area and touched the ground, taking note of the flowers that had been placed there in Jennifer's memory. She asked the police if any jewelry had been found, and police confirmed that they did indeed pick up jewelry as evidence. Additionally, Nancy asked about a small case with letters stamped on it. Investigators were kind of shocked that Nancy asked this, as Nancy was referring to a clarinet case that Jennifer was said to be holding with the letter L and O on it. It took 2 more years, but authorities found Jennifer's backpack, and inside was that same clarinet case with the letters L and O. Both the case and the backpack had prints on them, but unfortunately, they weren't able to match them to any of their suspects. According to Nancy, this was the work of not 1 but 2 killers. She also states that they both are/were mechanics, and one of them has a bad cough due to years of smoking. And something pretty crazy, the murderer was found earlier this year. In July of 2023, a man named Jeffrey Norman Crum Sr. was charged with the murder and rape of 12-year-old Jennifer Odom. Jeffrey had prior convictions of both kidnapping and sexual assault dating back to 1987. In a press release, police said that Jeffrey was a person of interest since 2015, and they had been building a case against him all this time. So great news that the monster responsible for Jennifer's death was found, but nevertheless, it's so strange that Nancy was able to provide such accurate information in regards to helping the case. Jacqueline Castaneda is the name of a baby girl born on January 14th, 2001. Only 4 months after her birth, she was kidnapped at a Phoenix swap meet. The mother, Olivia, was dropped off at the swap meet by her husband. Olivia brought along her 2 children and her mother. When she arrived, she had to use the restroom as the drive was a bit long. She walked around the swap meet looking for one, and she finally found a porta potty. Olivia thought it was too cramped and way too dirty, so she decided to leave Jacqueline outside while she stepped in. She later told police, "Jacqueline couldn't fit inside, so I just took my 2-year-old Annilia inside the restroom because she could have walked away if I left her outside. I was in the restroom for like a minute. When I came out, Jacqueline wasn't there anymore." When Olivia stepped out and realized that her 4-month-old was gone, she thought that her mother had simply taken her elsewhere. So she made her way back into the heart of the swap meet, but she realized that Jacqueline was not with her mother, but was instead missing entirely. After nearly 30 minutes of searching, Olivia contacted 911. Police immediately sealed off the swap meet upon arrival and stationed an officer at each exit, and every car that was leaving was searched. To this day, nobody has found Jacqueline, and not a single person has any idea who took her or what happened to her afterwards. On April 10, 2010, Polish President Lech Kaczynski and 95 others were killed in an airplane crash in a forest in Russia. There were 0 survivors. Obviously, the entirety of Poland was shocked at this event, and being that it involved so many political officials, people began asking themselves, was this an accident or intentional? To this day, there is debate on what truly happened. Kaczynski became president in 2005 and later appointed his brother as prime minister. He spent a lot of time informing people of the crimes that were committed against the Polish by the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. One of the events that he often spoke about was the Katyn massacre following the 1939 invasion of Poland. Over 20,000 Polish officers were executed in an attempt to weaken the Polish military in April of 1940. The majority of those victims were buried in a mass grave within the Katyn forests. In 1989, Soviet officials took responsibility for those events. By the time the 2010s rolled around, Poland and Russia were still at odds over the horrific events that had happened decades ago. 2010 also marked the 70th anniversary of the massacre. Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and Prime Minister Vladimir Putin tried to make amends, and Putin invited Polish officials to join him in a memorial service that was being held at the site of the massacre. Tons of various elites were invited, including Polish President Kaczynski. However, due to some political infighting, he was unable to attend and instead participated in a different ceremony. In order to make that event, Polish officials had to travel to a city populated with over 300,000 people. The city was called Smolensk. It had only one commercial airport, and it was much too small to land anything larger than a regional jet. Needless to say, it was less than adequate to handle the presidential aircraft. The only other option was to land the plane at another airport, which was once a military airfield. But the thing was, the area around this airport was sketchy to say the least. With no other choices, they went ahead with this second method. Tasked with the duty of safely transporting the president was the 36th Special Aviation Regiment of the Polish Air Force, and judging from that title, you may have expected for the crew to be quite experienced and accomplished, but apparently this was not the case. Some people even went as far as to say that their training was worse than the training at a commercial airline. They had absolutely zero simulator training and had no training in crew resource management. To make matters worse, the weather on the day of the flight became violent, and in order to keep this entry from dragging out too long, the flight was just very messy. There were tons of mistakes, and there was only one person on the flight that spoke Russian. Towards the latter half of the flight, the aircraft was getting really close to some terrain. It was just 91 meters above ground. The radio and everyone on board were desperately yelling out, "Pull up, pull up, pull up." Then at just about 25 meters above ground, trees began emerging out of the fog. The plane barely clipped a tree and rammed into a large birch, which sliced through the left wing. The employee on the radio shouted over and over, calling out for someone, but nobody responded. The assistant chief then said, "Well, fuck." To most, this probably doesn't seem like a mystery at all. It was just poor planning and preparation, especially when it came to choosing the proper crew. But nevertheless, there are real talks about the plane possibly being tampered with, amongst other theories. Back in March of 1945, in the latter end of World War II, a little boy named Siegfried Leyer of Merlenbach, Germany had befriended an American soldier. Siegfried's neighborhood had been completely demolished by Allied bombers. His mother took the three youngest children and fled the area. They walked over 125 miles to group with relatives in Merlenbach. Siegfried said, "It was very bad. I was 4 when the war ended. There was very little food to be had. We had to go with meal vouchers and buy food, but there wasn't much around." Not long after their arrival, a band of American soldiers rolled in. At first, the German civilians were fearful, thinking that the soldiers were looking for revenge. However, they had nothing to fear, as the soldiers were only there to provide food, water, and new clothing, as well as medical supplies. Amongst those soldiers was one named Alexander. Siegfried described him as sympathetic and friendly. He even went as far as to call him a guardian angel, and that without him, he may not be alive today. Alexander grew very close with the Leyer family and made daily trips to visit them over the next few months. That family saw him as one of their own. Siegfried said that he had no idea what Alexander was saying to him, and he didn't believe that Alexander knew any German either. But despite that, they were still able to communicate and develop a friendship that transcended race or nationality. Alexander even took Siegfried on trips to show him around. The two spent most of their days together. But the time ultimately came where Alexander had to leave. Siegfried said, "I was sad, perhaps I would never see him again. As I think about it today, I was really sad. I have always thought about how he helped us and that I should have helped other people. He was not obliged to us in any way, but he did it as a human being out of human love." The only item Siegfried owns that commemorates the time he spent with Alexander is a photo taken in 1945. Alexander was estimated to be about 20 years old when the photo was taken. Siegfried has no idea what Alexander's last name is, nor does he have any other information about the soldier. Terry Missy Bevers was murdered by an unknown individual on April 18, 2016, when she was preparing to teach a fitness class at a church. Over half a decade later, her assailant remains unidentified. Missy was a 45-year-old mother of 3 who grew up in Texas. She was passionate about living an active and healthy lifestyle and wanted to teach others how they could also lead healthier lives by teaching fitness classes. She had no known enemies and was well liked by her community. She taught a gladiator boot camp at the Creekside Church of Christ. It was a little after 4 a.m. when she arrived and prepared the room for her class. Then at 5 a.m., her lifeless body was discovered in the church and emergency officials were immediately contacted. Investigators discovered multiple stab wounds around her chest as well as what appeared to be a head injury. Officials determined that she may have been alive when the paramedics were first contacted, but likely passed away while they were still on the road. Not long after the murder, video footage from the church was made public. It showed a person holding a hammer while going through several rooms in the building. The person wore a helmet, gloves, shin guards, and a vest labeled police. Investigators were not certain whether the culprit was male or female. They stood between 5 foot 2 inches and 5 foot 8 inches. Additionally, this person walked with a limp. Due to marks found on the church's back entrance, police initially thought that the murder was a robbery gone wrong, but after further investigation, they realized that nothing was missing. Not even Missy's wedding ring was taken. Investigators were able to access Missy's phone and they uncovered intimate conversations on LinkedIn. Along with these flirtatious words were also creepy messages from an unknown man. Missy was very active on her social media accounts and often made posts talking about her boot camps. But on the night before her death, she suspiciously left a message that said, "Come rain or shine, the class would still go ahead." Investigators believe that her constant posts on her social media made it easy to track her. Initially, it was thought that Missy's husband, Brandon, may have been responsible or at the very least involved in this crime. But after providing a solid and verified alibi, it was clear that he was not responsible. Brandon informed police that he had no idea who would want to harm his wife. He also told them that Missy owned a gun, which she had left in her car on the day she was killed. Contrary to Brandon's statements, investigators found out that the couple's relationship was in despair and there were many financial issues as well as infidelity. Just 4 days after Missy's death, Brandon's father, Randy, took a bloody shirt to the dry cleaners. Without even being asked, Randy said that the blood was from breaking up a dog fight. But by now, the entire community knew of the recent murder, so the employee went to contact authorities. Police acquired the shirt and noted that it looked like someone had already tried to clean the blood out. Furthermore, they stated that Randy's build resembled that of the person seen in the camera footage, but Randy was also cleared of any suspicions since he had a verified alibi placing him in California during Missy's death. Even though Randy was basically cleared of all suspicions, in the community's eyes, he was guilty. After several weeks had passed, police made a new discovery. New security footage showed a Nissan Altima driving around a nearby parking lot just hours before Missy's death, but no one came forward to report the vehicle's owner. There was another suspicious dark SUV seen the same morning near the church, but there was also little to no info provided about that one either. Or at least that's what it seemed at first. It turned out that someone repeatedly contacted authorities with the same lead, but for whatever reason, the police just never got to it. This lead suggested that the owner of the second vehicle may be a former police officer named Bobby Wayne Henry. Bobby was suspended from police work after a sexual assault charge back in 1996. He owned a car that looked similar to the SUV, and he was also said to walk with a limp. A forensic podiatrist was commissioned to analyze the walk of Henry and Missy's murderer from the footage. The results were deemed inconclusive. Another issue with Henry being the culprit is that he was 6'1", way taller than the suspect in the footage. But even though Henry wasn't deemed the murderer, this investigation uncovered child pornography hidden amongst his devices. He was arrested in June of 2017 for the possession of CP. Missy's daughter Hannah spoke to several reporters about the horrific events surrounding her mother, and she had the following to say. "I've had people on Facebook message me and say, 'Your dad did this, your dad killed your mom.' My dad loved my mom and I know that 100%. Despite having several strong suspects, the true culprit responsible for Terry Bevers' death is still unknown. Switzerland is a beautiful country with a tranquil way of life and a population of just 8.5 million. But underneath that stunning appearance were 6 missing children's cases between 1981 and 1985. Their names were Peter Pergesi, Peter Roth, Salvatore Flavio Marino, Sylvie Beauvais, Sarah Oberson, and Edith Tritton-Bass. The oldest of them was 14 and the youngest 4. For Peter Pergesi, he was at practice for table tennis with his father on September 22, 1967. As he was getting ready to leave practice, he just suddenly disappeared. It was around 8 p.m. when practice ended, and outside was his locked up bike and his jacket. Peter Roth was the youngest of the children at 4 years old. It was about 12 p.m. on May 12, 1984, when Peter headed back home from school. He was all alone, and a witness shared that they saw him stepping inside a grocery store and coming out with snacks for himself and a friend. During the investigation, there was an empty chip bag that was found about 300 meters from his home, and it's presumed that this was the same bag of chips purchased by Peter. Salvatore Marino was with his father Giuseppe at the Rhone River on June 23, 1984. Giuseppe was fishing with Salvatore, playing in the open nearby. It was around 7 p.m. when Giuseppe heard his son screaming out, "Papa, Papa." Giuseppe immediately rose up and sprinted towards the voice of his son. He made it out to a road where he saw a white Volkswagen Beetle with 2 elderly people inside. The vehicle paused for a brief moment before driving off. The search for Salvatore only lasted a day and no useful clues were discovered. Several days after Salvatore went missing, his mother reported that a man and a woman called her and asked, "Do you miss your son?" The scarring abduction of Salvatore ultimately made his parents return home to Italy. Sylvie Beauvais was the name of a 12-year-old girl with cerebral palsy, and she was also epileptic. It was May 23, 1985, when Sylvie went for a walk in the forest with a teacher and a friend. It was about 7:30 to 8 p.m. when the trio were on their way back to a non-profit holiday home. Sylvie decided to venture out about 30 yards ahead of the others. It didn't take long for Sylvie to vanish from the teacher's sight, but she didn't think much of this and thought that Sylvie had returned home. However, when the teacher got back, she realized that Sylvie never made it. Over the next few days, she still failed to show up. And ever since, she's still been missing. Sarah Oberson was only 7 years old when she went missing, and her disappearance occurred just months after Sylvie's. Sarah's disappearance garnered immense media coverage, and it was actually the most famous missing child's case in Switzerland. Sarah left home around 5 p.m. on September 28, 1985 to pay a visit to her grandma. Time passed and Sarah's grandmother found it odd that Sarah had not yet arrived. Her parents were notified and immediately they went out looking for the now missing Sarah. Over a dozen neighbors also assisted in the search. Not long into this mission, Sarah's bike was found near the school gym. 2 boys in the area said they saw a girl that resembled Sarah's description hanging around the schoolyard, which wasn't far from home. Once it was 9:30 p.m., Sarah's father, Claude, called the police. Flyers with her face were placed all over grocery stores and neighborhoods, as well as the newspaper. But no matter what was done, nobody came forward with any information. Rumors began to spread that Sarah was spotted in Vienna, Austria with an unidentified man. When Claude caught wind of this news, he got on an Austrian radio and yelled the following: "Struggle, fight, scream, do everything you can so that we can find you." The final victim we will be talking about is Edith Tritton-Bass. She was born on December 18, 1978. It was May 3, 1986 when she left home at 8 a.m. for school, but she would never make it. The teachers and staff contacted her parents to see if Edith was sick or something, but to their horror, they were told that she left for school a while ago. Police and volunteers spent days searching for Edith, or at the very least clues to find her, but to no avail. There are so many suspects tied to the disappearance of these children. However, there seems to be a pretty even split of people on either side on whether these kids were abducted by the same or different culprits. One of the more notorious suspects was a man named Werner Ferrari. Werner was a serial killer that took the life of his first victim in 1971. It was a boy named Daniel Schwann. Werner received a 10-year sentence for this crime and only served 8 years of it. Over the course of 1980 to 1989, Werner kidnapped nearly a dozen kids, with the youngest being 6 and the oldest being 14. 8 of these children were found dead. The other 3 kids were never found. Whether Werner Ferrari was actually involved in the disappearance of the kids we discussed is unknown, but many people do believe that he is involved. This entry focuses on a radio station in New York called WKCR. In 1995, there was an interruption and I love to play it for you all, but unfortunately, this track that nobody knows who made was taken and used to make another song, and that artist copyright claims anyone who uses the original. But if you want to give it a listen, simply search the old tape on YouTube and it will probably be the first thing to pop up. The video starts with some music, but about 17 seconds in, you hear a scream and then a voice begins listing off obituaries, with occasional funeral bells that come into play. Internet sleuths were able to track this back to 4chan. As far as I know, the original post is gone and no one archived it, but a different thread mentioned a part of it. It said, around 1995, I was about 15 years old. I used to stay up late in my room listening to the radio on a boombox with an integrated tape recorder. I'd dial through the stations, and when I heard something interesting, I'd hit record for a while, then move on. One night I came across this. I don't think this was the beginning of the broadcast, but I caught a lot of it. Right at the end, an announcer says that the station I was tuned to was WCKR 89.9, New York. There are a bunch of names and dates in there, but I've never run into anything else like this. That could possibly be the very first mention of the audio that appeared on the radio. If you're still here and decided to not give the audio a listen, I'll go ahead and read off part of a shortened transcript of what the interruption said. February 1985, Frank Oppenheimer, brother, husband, father, friend. August 1985, Irene McGillis, sister and mother. May 1987, Henrietta Graham, mother. July 4th, 1987, Peter Dunwell, son, brother, husband. You can pretty much get the idea from there. The interruption went on to list another 5 people, all of whom died in 1988. The first person mentioned, Frank Oppenheimer, was the brother of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Then another person that was mentioned later on was named Barry Valentino, who was on board Pan Am Flight 103, which, if you don't know, exploded in a bombing in December of 1988. Theories range from the interruption being a hoax to the real thing. Some suggest that the event was a play at getting the radio station in the news, but it seems that most people believe that the entire thing was just a prank. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. At the pinnacle of the Civil War, there were over 50,000 casualties between the Union and the Confederacy, and according to many, the ghosts of these soldiers haunt Gettysburg to this day. A historian by the name of Mark Nesbitt said, "At Gettysburg, there was so much emotional energy expended in a short period of time. From the 15-year-old kid who was scared to death that he'd never make it home, to the 40-year-old man who'd just been shot through the lungs and was dying and thinking about his family. You have to think that some of it must remain." Over the years, many people have reported having paranormal experiences in the area, most of which were reported by Civil War reenactors. On one occasion, a pair of reenactors said that they were confronted by a large, rough-looking man. One of the men said, "I think I seen a ghost. I think this guy had original equipment on, original coat. Everything, to me, points out that it was original." Where this story gets a bit wobbly is when one of the men claims that he was handed authentic ammunition. This ammunition was later confirmed to be authentic by a university history professor. On another occasion, a group of friends set out for Gettysburg in the summer of 1993. When they reached a creek called Bloody Run, they claimed to have stumbled upon a man laying in the bushes. He appeared to be a man laying there, but he wasn't solid like you and I are. I mean, he was more of a hazy mist. He was shivering cause it looked like he was in a lot of pain. I couldn't go any further. Emotionally, I broke down and cried. I was shaking. I had to actually have somebody come back and lead me out of the trail. There are tons of additional reported ghost sightings in Gettysburg, but nothing with definitive proof. Are these sightings real or just a figment of people's imagination? In the mid-1970s, a killing spree took off in New York. 6 people were killed and 7 others were injured. The man responsible was named David Berkowitz, who was dubbed the Son of Sam before he was caught. His reign started in late July of 1976, where he shot 2 girls, resulting in 1 death. 3 months down the line, he struck again, this time taking the life of a resident of Queens. Then another 2 girls the next month, also in Queens, were shot. Both girls survived, but one was paralyzed and wheelchair bound for the rest of her life. By now, the news of this killer was was well known, and a composite sketch was revised several times and released to the public. It would take another 6 months before the killer struck again. 2 women were murdered in isolated shootings. But this is where witnesses began providing details on the shooter that weren't consistent with the previously established information. Another murder occurred around April of 1977. However, this time the killer left behind a letter that said, "I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I'm a little brat." New York was left in fear during this time, with people looking out for one another in the streets. If a resident inside of their apartment saw a person walking alone in the streets, they would yell out from their window, "Hurry and get inside, there's a murderer out there." The son of Sam issued another letter on Memorial Day of the same year, this time containing cryptic references to Satan. Less than a month after that letter went out, the son of Sam killed again. This time, a woman named Stacy Moskowitz was killed and her boyfriend was left partially blind. Eyewitnesses were brought in again to provide details for a composite sketch. And once more, the details provided varied from the first sketch. In the middle of the investigation, police came across a vehicle with a parking ticket stuck to it near the crime scene of the most recent murder. The owner of the vehicle was determined to be a man named David Berkowitz, who worked in the post office. Inside the vehicle was a rifle sticking out of a duffel bag and a letter written by the son of Sam. But authorities didn't immediately jump on this discovery. They lurked in the area for a little while, and what do you know, Berkowitz comes out and moves towards his car with a brown paper bag. Inside this bag was a .44 caliber revolver, the same revolver which was used to take so many innocent lives. During his interrogation, Berkowitz confessed to all of the murders. He told police that he only killed those people because his dog told him to. He ultimately got 25 to life. While the police force and the public celebrated, an author named Maury Terry had a nagging feeling that there was more to this case than meets the eye. Terry suggested that Berkowitz was not the sole culprit behind the murders. He said, "The very early reports on the Moskowitz killing had me concerned. David Berkowitz's features were widely different from the sketches of the killer that had been done by the police artists. I started seeking out witnesses and found Tommy Zano, who was a key witness to the shooting. According to Tommy, the man he saw kill Moskowitz was in pretty good physical shape. In his own words, he said, 'In a week, he can't get that fat.'" Another aspect that Terry finds odd is that Berkowitz's abrasive personality doesn't seem consistent with the elusive and meticulous conduct that the son of Sam practiced. Specifically, Terry was referring to the moments before Moskowitz was shot. Berkowitz pulled right up behind her car and started smashing his car horn with a police car nearby. Terry just felt that this was oddly out of character. Maury Terry believes that there were at least 3 other people involved in the son of Sam murders, and David Berkowitz was selected as the fall guy. But to be clear, Terry is not arguing that Berkowitz is innocent, not at all. She believes that he was responsible for at least 3 of the murders, but was not the culprit behind the rest. There were also several high-ranking NYPD personnel who shared Terry's sentiment. So, besides David, who else was involved? Well, there was a pair of brothers that police were suspicious of, John and Michael Carr. There were 2 composite sketches that Terry believed resembled John. He was a mechanic at an Air Force base in North Dakota and often found himself tied up with illegal substances. Outside of work, he also hung around seasoned criminals, and just 6 months after Berkowitz's arrest, he was found dead in his girlfriend's apartment. There is heated debate on whether he took his own life or if he was murdered. Then, 2 years after the arrest, Michael Carr was killed in a car accident. And get this, David Berkowitz admitted to being friends with the brothers, and the 3 of them often participated in satanic rituals. Furthermore, Berkowitz said that the brothers were murdered in order to keep them from leaking any sensitive information. In one of the Son of Sam letters, a group called the 22 Disciples of Hell was referenced. Some investigators think that the disciples were responsible for organizing the Carr brothers' deaths. Terry also claimed that a 15-year-old high school student called her to inform her that there was a satanic cult meeting in Untermeyer Park, which was not far from Berkowitz's apartment. The student said that the group was sacrificing dogs. When he took Terry to see the location the next day, the 2 saw the leftover satanic symbols that were spray painted onto the ground. There were also remains of what they believed to be 2 to 3 German shepherds. So was it really just David Berkowitz who was behind all of the killings, or was he simply a pawn? There was one letter that ended with, "There are other sons out there, God help the world." Billy the Kid, born in New York in 1859, is one of history's most notorious criminals, having killed nearly 24 men. One of the more famous chapters of his life was when he got into a heated fight against wealthy ranchers and received a death sentence after killing Sheriff William Brandy. Billy had a bounty of $500 placed on his head, which I believe is about $15,000 today. A sheriff by the name of Pat Garrett hunted Billy and ultimately backed him into Fort Sumner, New Mexico, where he killed him. Most historians believe that Billy was buried nearby the very next day in a mundane cave. However, there are now people that suggest that history is incorrect and Billy the Kid was never killed that day. Nearly 70 years after Billy's supposed death, a man who went by Brushy Bill Roberts claimed that he was actually Billy the Kid. There are many historians that are on the side that Brushy Bill and Billy the Kid are the exact same person. So what evidence is there exactly to support this claim? Let's begin in the year 1948, when an attorney named William Morrison learned that Billy the Kid was still alive. A prior client of Williams said that he got into a tussle with Billy the Kid during the Lincoln County Wars. This had Williams' attention, so he made the journey all around western US, interviewing the generation that would have grown up alongside Billy. And most, if not all of them, also believed that Billy was still alive and kicking. Some of them also said that Billy was now going by Brushy Bill. Then in 1949, William made his way to Hico, Texas, since someone told him Brushy Bill was going to be there. According to William, Brushy was hesitant initially, but ultimately admitted to being Billy the Kid. But obviously, mere words aren't really going to do much to convince someone like William. So he requested additional proof, and Brushy lifted up his shirt to show him his scars. Apparently, they all matched up with the wounds that Billy the Kid sustained during his prime. Brushy also brought along William to some of his former haunts in Lincoln County, and William's daughter also claims that Brushy was telling the truth. William gathered about 5 people who knew Billy personally from the Lincoln County War, and they all signed off stating that Brushy really was Billy the Kid. So, if Brushy really is who he says, then who did the sheriff kill back in 1881? This is what Brushy had to say. He claimed that he was hanging around at home with his girlfriend Celsa and his partner in crime, Billy Barlow. When the night was at its darkest, a barrage of gunshots went off at Billy and his crew. Barlow was hit and Billy took 2 shots, one in his head and one in his shoulder. This was enough to knock him out completely. When he woke up, he was in the lap of his girlfriend. According to Celsa, Billy Barlow was taken and buried in place of Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett later went on to say that he knew he killed the wrong person. He went out of the way to conceal the identity of the body. Normally, he would have to brandish all of Billy the Kid's equipment to the public to prove that he was the right person, but Garrett never did that. In 1950, Brushy requested that William, the attorney, get him a pardon that he was promised long ago. William agreed, but the meeting with the governor of New Mexico was a bit of a shit show. Brushy was 90 years old at this point, and the massive crowd that heard the news wanted to see Billy the Kid for themselves. For whatever reason, the governor saw this and declined to even